And then they're now bathed in this halo of pro-sociality now. That enables them to develop as a person, as their own person, and to develop long-term goals. So this is all comes together as a package. But all this is true only in a statistical sense. We can also make another prediction. In this big data set, can we find high pro individuals who are in a low pro social environment? And what would we predict for them? And that's what I call the fish out of water phenomenon. So here's a number of questions that were asked about what happened to you in the last 2 years, many of which are aversive. Was a family member a victim of a crime? Did someone offer to sell you drugs? Did someone threaten to hurt you? Did you get into a physical fight? Were you hit or beaten up? Were you shot at? And so large is this database that for that question, over 100 youth answered, yes, I was shot at during the last 2 years. Now, what these negative coefficients here say is that if you are a highly pro-social individual, these things, these bad things, are less likely to happen to you. We've already shown that, okay? What these positive coefficients say is that if you are a highly pro-social individual, and if these things did happen to you, you will be more stressed than if you are a low pro-social individual. You are not in the right environment, okay? And this is why I think, so if you're a high pro, just imagine you're a sweetie, okay? Wouldn't hurt a fly, and you get plunged into an environment that's full of sharks. What are you going to do? Well, leave is the best thing to do. But if you can't leave, what are you going to do? Well, change the social environment is another thing you can do. And if you can't do either of those things, then you should turn off your prosociality. And so most of the individuals in this sample that are scoring low on prosociality, it's not that they have an incapacity for being prosocial. It's that they're turned off their prosociality because they're not in an environment in which that would be a successful behavior, and people are flexible enough to do that. Now, in the sample, I want to say, I don't have time to talk about it, there's also some social predators in this sample that are low in prosociality, feel great about themselves, and engage in long-term planning, and they'll probably become lawyers. So there are, you know, there's a perfectly reasonable strategy of someone who's selfish, feels good about it, and is playing that trade. And so what I'm trying to do in a very quick way is to convey what is really comes naturally to an ecologist and an evolutionist. You know, ecologists talk about species having a distribution and abundance, and many species coexisting in a community. Why is that? It's because there's so many ways to survive and reproduce. And basically what I'm saying in a nutshell is that we can interpret human behavioral and cultural diversity like this. And even though the mechanisms are different, the mechanisms of human psychological change and cultural change are different in detail than genetic evolution. In a broad scale, we can interpret human behavioral and cultural diversity in the same way that we interpret biological diversity. Well, wouldn't it be nice to study this in an ongoing community? We've recently started to do this in our city of Binghamton. We call it the Binghamton Neighborhood Project. We partner with the Search Institute, and because this is a school-based group, how many people know about Search Institute? Oh, not less than I thought. They're a social science research institute, nonprofit, that is dedicated to partnering with communities, very often with schools, in order to build healthy children, youth, and communities. And they developed something called a developmental assets profile. It's a survey which measures some of these positive things. We gave, so here's an example of the personal subscale of this profile. Students are asked to indicate their agreement with statements such as, I stand up for what I believe in, I feel good about myself, I enjoy reading or being read to, I deal with frustration, I take responsibility for what I do, okay? These are all personal developmental assets. What parent wouldn't want their children to score highly on a scale such as this? I certainly would. And so we gave this with the help of the Binghamton City School district to about 2,000 students in grades 6 through 12. Here's our typical bell-shaped curve. But what's special about this is that as background information, we had residential location of the students. And through the miracle of geographical information systems, if you take a point here where nobody lives, you can still calculate a value by basically taking an average of the surrounding points. And that's called kriging, and it enables you to take data such as this and turn it into a continuous surface. And so what you're seeing here is the city of Binghamton. There are the two rivers coming together. That's the outline of the city. And the dark areas are like hills, and the light areas are like valleys. But these are not geographical hills and valleys. These are high and low values and how the students score on the personal subscale. This is measuring a psychological variable. And even without knowing anything about the city, you can appreciate how hilly it is. What we're measuring is small-scale spatial variation in this personal subscale. Well, here's the same view, except it's in a TD view. Dark is high, light is low. And just to show you what this means on the ground, here's a single street, Vine Street, which runs along a gradient. The top of Vine Street is in a high area. The students are scoring high on this subscale. And then as you go down the street, they score low. So what does this look like? Here's the top of Vine Street, nice suburban neighborhood. There's the bottom of Vine Street. It's 15 seconds away on a bike. It's a very short street. And we see a difference. I can't quite articulate what it is. The houses are in less good shape. This might be a rental. Okay? We notice the difference. And yet this map is not a difference of physical differences, but this is what's inside the heads of the students living in those neighborhoods. So this is really telling us about this relationship between individuals and their environment. So there's the 3D view of the personal subscale, and now here's a similar view of the prosocial subscale. This is measuring what the students think about others, how other-oriented they are. And just visually, you can see that the hills and valleys are much the same, okay? The dots, in case you're interested, are the location of churches. And here's a similar map for the community subscale. This is what they say about their neighborhoods. And of course, I could show you this statistically, but the point is that the same package, basically, of individuals which are other-oriented, feel great about themselves, and live in a nurturing social environment is present for the city of Binghamton in addition to the previous studies. So before I showed you a cartoon of patches of high and low prosociality, and here is a real thing. Well, what does this mean? What does a survey mean? We want to validate these results. So these students actually saying something that's accurate about their neighborhoods. I'm just going to tell you, we've actually validated this in 4 or 5 ways, but here's 2. There's a method called the lost letter method, and what it involves is dropping stamped envelopes all over the city. They were all addressed to Job Search Committee, Department of Biology, Binghamton University. The return address was coded to indicate their drop point, and then you can use the return rate to measure the cooperativeness of the neighborhood. So if you are walking down the street and you see a letter lying on the sidewalk, stamped, are you nice enough to pick it up, take it to the nearest mailbox, and drop it in the mailbox? So what do you think the return rate was for overall return rate? 20%? More? 5? Well, first thing that happened actually was that we triggered the Postal Office's Homeland Security alarm system. So we don't know about our neighborhoods, but we know that our country is well protected because they noticed all these letters coming in, and they noticed that the return addresses were fake, and they slit them open to see if there was anthrax and things like that. But the overall return rate was 60%, which is very good. We live in a friendly city for the most part, but still big differences among neighborhoods. 20-point differences between neighborhoods, and the differences here on this are social capital. So this is basically what the students are saying about their neighborhoods. I live in a safe neighborhood. I have neighbors who help, and so on. And this is the difference. Just a couple more here. In economics, there's a wonderful burgeoning field of experimental economics in which these games have been developed that measure the capacity for trust and cooperation and so on. So we use this. We played this game with 9th graders, and we did what's called a two-person sequential prisoner's dilemma. So a lot of you are probably familiar with the prisoner's dilemma. It's a game in which there's you should cooperate, but there's a temptation to defect. This is sequential. So the one person goes first, they can cooperate or defect, and then the second person gets to go. If you cooperate and your partner cooperates, you both get $30. If you cooperate and your partner defects, you get $10, and your partner gets 45, so there's the temptation to defect. If you defect and your partner defects, then you both get 16. So you should cooperate, but there's a temptation to defect. When everyone defects, then the solution is worse. And so the students are taught this game, and then they are asked 3 questions. How would you play as a first mover? How would you play as a second mover if your first partner cooperated? How would you play as a second mover if your partner defected? And there's a number of strategies, sort of social strategies, which emerge from this. You might be an unconditional cooperator, a pure sweetie, who just always cooperates regardless of what your partner does. You might be a what we call friendly tit for tat. You cooperate as first mover. If your partner cooperates and you're second, you cooperate. But if your partner defects, you defect. Okay? Or you might be what we call an optimistic non-cooperator, where you sort of think others will cooperate. So you cooperate if you're first. But if some sucker cooperates first and you go second, then you screw them. And here's pessimistic tit for tat. You figure that if you're first, that your partner is going to defect, so you defect preemptively. But if you're pleasantly surprised, then you cooperate. And then finally, we have the unconditional non-cooperator. Well, these results are very interesting results, playing with these 9th grade students. And here's a result which is based on trust. So this is how what you do as a first mover. Do you cooperate as a first mover? And what this shows is, now there's 2 things we want to look at. One is social capital, what the students say about their neighborhoods. And the second is socioeconomics, how wealthy are these neighborhoods. These are statistically positively correlated. So money is good. Okay, the wealthier neighborhoods statistically have a higher social capital. But if you do an analysis in which you first look at social capital, and then you factor that out, and then you look at the residual variation, then it turns out that income has a negative effect upon trust, so that the most trusting students are the ones who are in neighborhoods that are high in social capital and low in income.